The funeral was perfect. The flowers were perfect. The only problem was the Alpha King would not leave. From within the suffocating darkness of the coffin, Alara could hear the muffled sounds of her own eulogy. It was a masterpiece of fiction, spun by the village elder who had taken a hefty bribe of her meagre savings to perform the service. He spoke of a sweet, quiet girl, prone to illness, who had finally succumbed to the lung fever that had plagued her for years. A tragic loss, a gentle soul taken too soon. A bitter smile she could not show touched Alara's lips. Gentle was not the word she would have chosen. Desperate, perhaps. Cunning, certainly. She had spent 2 weeks meticulously brewing the potion from whisper root and dusk petal, a concoction that would slow her heart to a near imperceptible flutter and plunge her into a death-like trance for 12 hours. Enough time for a hasty funeral. Enough time for her to be buried in the shallow grave at the edge of the woods, where her only friend, Anya, would be waiting to dig her out after nightfall. It was an insane plan, born of sheer terror. The annual mating claim was only a day away, and her sister, Lyra, had made her intentions clear. Lyra, with her bright, cruel beauty, was the jewel of their village. She had already caught the eye of the brutish pack alpha, Gavril, a man whose knuckles were permanently bruised and whose gaze was a physical violation. But Gavril, like all alphas, had the right to choose any unmated omega, and Lyra had whispered to Alara only 3 nights ago, her breath smelling of sour wine. "He wants you for the bedding ceremony. A little practice before he settles for me as his mate. Don't worry, little sister. I'll make sure he doesn't break you. Not completely." The thought of Gavril's hands on her, of the public humiliation and the pain, was a black chasm that threatened to swallow her whole. Death was better. Or, in this case, the illusion of it. Once free, she would flee north, to the unclaimed lands. She would be a ghost, a no one, but she would be free. The eulogy ended. There was a smattering of polite, insincere sniffles. She heard Lyra's theatrical sob, a performance for the village. The sound grated on Alara's soul. Then came the scraping of dirt on the cheap pine lid. It was happening. It was working. A profound sense of relief, cold and sharp, washed through her paralyzed limbs. But then a new sound cut through the quiet murmurs, the rhythmic thud of heavy, measured footsteps on the path. A sudden, collective intake of breath from the mourners. The air itself seemed to grow colder, heavier. A silence fell, so absolute it was more profound than any noise. It was a silence of power, a silence of fear. Alara's own slow-beating heart gave a painful lurch. This was not part of the plan. Village funerals were not events of state. King Kale of the Northern Realm felt nothing. This was not a new sensation. It was the only sensation he had known for 300 years. He moved through his world as a phantom, wrapped in an eternal, internal winter. He saw the vibrant colours of his kingdom, the crimson of the royal banners, the gold of the autumn leaves, but they were like muted pigments in a forgotten painting. He heard the music in his halls, the petitions of his people, the clash of training swords, but the sounds were distant, filtered through a thick sheet of ice. His curse was not one of pain, but of absence. A witch, dying by his ancestor's sword, had spat a final breath of frigid magic, decreeing that his bloodline would rule, but never feel. They would have power, but no joy, strength, but no warmth. Love, the most potent magic of all, would be a word they could read, but never comprehend. It had made his dynasty formidable, unflinching, unbeatable, and utterly, devastatingly empty. The wolf within him, a great silver beast of shadow and frost, was as numb as he was. It was a creature of pure, cold instinct, a weapon he could wield, but it offered no companionship, no fire, no life. It was just another part of the great, silent void he inhabited. He had been passing through this small, insignificant village on his way back from a border negotiation when he had seen the sombre procession. Protocol demanded he pay his respects. It was a gesture, a performance of a feeling he could not possess. He was playing the part of a king. It was all he ever did. He walked toward the open grave, his black cloak swirling around his boots like smoke. The villagers fell to their knees as he approached, heads bowed, their fear a palpable thing in the air. He ignored them. His gaze fell upon the simple, unadorned coffin being lowered into the earth. Just another subject, another death. It meant nothing. He stopped at the edge of the grave, a silent, towering figure of ice and authority. He was meant to say a few words, to offer a hollow blessing. He opened his mouth to speak the well-rehearsed lines. And then it happened. The wolf, his silent, frozen companion of centuries, went still. It was not the stillness of apathy. It was the stillness of a predator that has caught an impossible scent on the wind. It was absolute. A profound, soul-shaking cessation of all movement, all thought, all instinct except one. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through Cale's entire being, a feeling so alien it was nearly painful. It was a crack in the ice, a single clear note in an eternity of silence. Mine, the word was not his own, it was the wolf's. A primal, possessive roar that echoed not in his ears, but in the marrow of his bones. It was the first thing his wolf had truly said to him in 300 years. Cale's grey eyes, the colour of a winter storm, narrowed on the pine box. It was impossible. The girl was dead. He could feel nothing from her, no warmth, no life. And yet, the wolf was certain, the core of his being, the part of him tied to the ancient magic of his kind, was screaming a truth his cursed senses could not perceive. His mate. His other half. The one soul in all existence meant to anchor his own. Was in that box. He did not question the feeling. It was too powerful, too fundamental. For the first time, a flicker of something that might have been fury ignited in the void of his chest. The universe had a cruel sense of humour. To grant him a mate, only to have her be dead. But was she? The hum, faint as it was, felt like a thread of life. A stubborn, flickering ember that refused to be extinguished. He took a step forward. "Stop," he commanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. It was the sound of glaciers grinding together. The two men holding the ropes froze, their eyes wide with terror. He looked at the village elder, whose face had gone as white as bone. "Who is she?" A village girl, Your Majesty," the elder stammered. Elara she was, unwell. Cale's gaze returned to the coffin. Elara, the name, settled into the crack in his soul, a perfect fit. He could feel it now, a desperate, thrumming pulse beneath the surface of the world. Faint, so very faint, but there, open it. The command was quiet, but it shattered the silence. The elder gaped at him. A woman in the small crowd, her face a mask of shocked fury that quickly morphed into feigned grief, stepped forward. "Lyra, Your Majesty, please, let my poor sister rest in peace. Her body is too fragile." Kyle's head turned slowly, and he fixed Lyra with a gaze so cold it seemed to steal the air from her lungs. He did not need to feel emotion to project menace. His power was a physical force. "I did not give you leave to speak." Lyra flinched back as if struck. "Open it," Kael repeated, his voice dropping lower, colder. Now, inside the coffin, Elara heard every word. Panic, sharp and electrifying, sliced through the potion's heavy fog. This could not be happening. The Alpha King? Here? Why? The plan was unraveling into a nightmare. She tried to move, to scream, to do anything, but her body was a leaden prison. Only her mind was free, and it was racing in a cage of terror. She heard the groan of ropes as the coffin was hauled back up. She heard the horrified gasps of the villagers. Then the screech of nails being pried from wood. Light, blinding and intrusive, flooded the narrow space as the lid was lifted away. The first thing she saw, through blurry eyes, was a face that seemed carved from granite and winter frost. High cheekbones, a severe jaw, and eyes the colour of a storm-tossed sea. He was impossibly tall, a monolith of black and silver, and the power rolling off him was a physical pressure, suffocating her. The Alpha King. Kael looked down at the girl in the box. She was pale, her skin like porcelain, but it was not the waxy, lifeless pallor of the dead. There was a faint, almost imperceptible flush to her cheeks. Her lips, though bloodless, were not blue. But it was her scent that struck him like a physical blow. Faint, suppressed, but undeniably there. The scent of wood smoke, wild lavender, and something uniquely her own, something that smelled like hope. It was the scent of his mate. Alive, he reached down, his fingers brushing against the pulse point on her neck. He felt it. A slow, thready beat, thump, thump, thump. The sound echoed the hum in his own soul. He straightened up, his expression unreadable. But the storm in his eyes had intensified. He turned to the stunned crowd. His voice rang out across the graveyard, clear and final, a king's decree that would alter the course of all their lives. This funeral is over. She is mine. Elara awoke to the scent of cold stone and beeswax. She was lying in a bed so large it felt like a snow-covered field, the sheets crisp and cool against her skin. The room was vast, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadow and a tall arched window that looked out not on the familiar green of her village woods, but on a sheer drop into swirling grey clouds. A brazier in the corner burned with coals that glowed blue, casting a strange, ethereal light but providing no discernible warmth. Panic seized her. She sat up, the last dregs of the potion making her head spin. The coffin. The king. She is mine. The words echoed in her memory, a death knell for her desperate bid for freedom. She was in his fortress. The Silver Spire, it was called in legends. A castle carved from the peak of a mountain, said to be perpetually encased in ice, much like the king who ruled from it. The heavy stone door creaked open, and he entered. King Kael moved with a silent grace that was unnerving in a man so large. He wore simple black, unadorned with any jewels, yet his presence was more regal than any finery could have made it. He stopped several feet from the bed, his storm-grey eyes fixed on her. The room, already cold, seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "You are awake," he stated. It was not a question. Elara pulled the furs higher, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had to be careful. Her life was balanced on a knife's edge. "Where am I, Your Majesty?" "My home," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "You will tell me why you were in that coffin." She met his gaze, and for the first time she truly looked at him. She saw past the immense power and the chilling aura. She saw an emptiness in his eyes so profound it was like looking into the void between stars. It was not cruelty she saw there. It was nothing. A complete and utter absence. And beneath that nothing, a weariness that seemed ancient. Something inside her, some core of defiant strength that had refused to be broken by Lyra or Gavril, rose to the surface. She would not cower. He had saved her, whether he meant to or not, from a fate worse than death. The least she owed him was the truth. "I was escaping," she said, her voice quiet but steady. A flicker of something, interest, confusion, passed through his glacial eyes. Escaping what? Death? A life that was a kind of death, she clarified. I was to be used in the mating claim. I chose another way. He was silent for a long moment, studying her. He was trying to understand the concept of her desperation, but the emotions driving it were alien to him. Fear, humiliation, the desire for freedom. They were just words. Yet her bravery, her refusal to tremble before him, that was something he understood. It was a form of strength. "The men in the village," he said, his voice flat. "The one they call Gavril. He will no longer be a problem." Elara's breath caught. She did not need to ask what that meant. The finality in the king's tone was absolute. He had erased her problem with a word. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran down her spine. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you stop them? Why bring me here?" Cale's gaze did not waver. The wolf inside him was awake now, watching her through his eyes, still humming that one single word. Mine. But how could he explain that to her? How could he explain a bond he could not feel, a connection his curse would not allow him to comprehend? "My reasons are my own," he said, the cold mask of the king settling back over his features. "You are safe here. You will be cared for. That is all you need to know." He turned and left as silently as he had come, leaving Elara alone in the vast, cold room, more a prisoner than a guest, but undeniably, terrifyingly, alive. The days that followed were a study in quiet observation. King Cale did not summon her, but she felt his presence everywhere. She felt his eyes on her as she walked the cold, echoing halls of the spire, a fortress of polished grey stone and shimmering ice crystals that grew like vines along the walls. The servants were ghosts, silent and efficient, their faces pale and impassive. They brought her food, fine clothes of wool and velvet in shades of grey and blue, but they never spoke unless spoken to. There was no life here, no laughter. The entire castle was a reflection of its king, powerful, magnificent, and utterly frozen. Elara refused to be a passive prisoner. She explored. She found a library filled with thousands of books, their pages brittle with age. She spent hours there, the silence a comfortable blanket. She found the high battlements where the wind screamed with a wild, lonely voice, and she would stand there for hours, looking out at the endless sea of clouds below, a queen in a castle in the sky. She was not afraid of the king. Intimidated, yes, but not afraid. She saw him from a distance, watching his guards train in the courtyard, their movements precise and deadly. He would stand for hours, motionless as a statue, his gaze distant. He never wore a heavy cloak, even when frost formed on the stone railings. The cold did not touch him. He was the cold. One evening, a week after her arrival, a man in the fine robes of a royal adviser approached her in the library. He was older, with a stern, hawkish face and eyes that missed nothing. "My lady," he said, his voice smooth but laced with disapproval, "I am Lord Valerius, the king's hand. His Majesty has commanded that you dine with him tonight." Elara looked up from her book. "Has he?" Valerius's lips thinned. He was clearly not accustomed to his pronouncements being met with anything other than immediate obedience. The king's judgment is at times difficult for lesser men to comprehend. He has taken an interest in you. I would advise you not to mistake that interest for affection. He is not capable of such things. The warning was clear. You are a curiosity, nothing more. Do not get ideas above your station. I have no illusions, my lord, Elara replied calmly, closing her book. "I am merely a guest here." "A guest," Valerius repeated, a note of scorn in his voice. "Indeed, see that you remember it." The dining hall was as grand and cold as the rest of the castle. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to roast an ox, but its heat seemed to be swallowed by the stone before it could reach the centre of the room. Kael sat at the head of a long, empty table, a solitary figure in the vast space. Elara took the seat indicated by a servant a dozen feet away from him. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sound the clink of silverware on porcelain. The tension was a living thing, a cold fog between them. Finally, Elara put down her fork. She could not bear the pretense. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked again, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. Kael looked at her, his expression as impassive as ever. But his wolf was pacing, restless. Her presence was a constant, low-level thrum against his senses, a song he could not quite hear but could feel in his bones. She was not afraid of him. She did not flatter him. She simply was. It was the most confounding thing he had ever encountered. "You are my mate," he said. The words fell into the silence, heavy and shocking. Elara stared at him, her mind reeling. Mate, an Omega from a forgotten village, the mate to the Alpha King. It was impossible. A cruel joke. That cannot be. "My wolf does not lie," he stated, a simple, irrefutable fact. "It recognized you, even in that box, even when it has been silent for centuries." She searched his face, looking for any sign of deception, of mockery. She found none, only that vast, weary emptiness. He was telling her a truth he himself did not seem to understand. Suddenly, her strange circumstances made a terrifying kind of sense. The rescue, the castle, the possessive way he had claimed her. "But you feel nothing," she whispered, the realization dawning on her. A mate bond was a fiery, all-consuming thing, a storm of emotion and connection. But he looked at her as if she were a complex puzzle, not the other half of his soul. For the first time since she had met him, Kael's mask of indifference cracked. A shadow of something ancient and painful moved in the depths of his eyes. "No," he said, his voice rough, "I do not." The admission hung between them, more vulnerable than any confession of love could ever be. He was bound to her, yet utterly cut off from the bond. A king chained to a throne he could not feel. The cold in the room suddenly felt different. It was not just the stone or the magical ice. It was him. It emanated from him like an aura. She watched as he lifted a silver goblet to his lips, and a delicate lacework of frost spread from his fingertips, coating the polished metal. He did not seem to notice. It was a small thing, but it was a key turning a lock in her mind. The way he never wore cloaks, the way fire gave no warmth in his presence, the chilling emptiness in his eyes. It was not just his nature, it was something more, something wrong. One night, days later, she found him standing on the highest battlement, the wind whipping his black hair around his face. Snow was falling, thick and heavy, but it seemed to melt and vanish before it could touch his skin, sizzled away by an intense cold that was his alone. He was staring out into the storm, a solitary king in a world of white. Elara walked toward him, her own cloak pulled tight. She stopped beside him, not touching, but close enough that he would know she was there. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the snow fall. She finally gathered her courage and asked the question that had been burning in her mind, a question no one in his entire kingdom had likely ever dared to voice. It was simple, it was direct, and it was terrifyingly intimate. "Why are you always so cold, Your Majesty?" The question struck Kyle with the force of a physical blow. No one had ever asked. They felt his chilling aura and kept their distance. They saw his impassive face and assumed it was the iron will of a king. They accepted his nature as a fact, like the stone of the mountains or the ice of the glaciers. No one had ever looked at his coldness and seen it not as a strength, but as a wound. He turned his head slowly to look at her. Her face was flushed from the wind, her eyes clear and full of a genuine, searching curiosity. There was no pity in her gaze, no fear, only a quiet desire to understand, and for the second time since meeting her, something broke inside him. A dam of silence that had stood for 300 years crumbled into dust. The words, his secret, his shame, spilled out of him into the screaming wind, spoken to the only person in the world who had ever thought to ask. "I am cursed," he said, the words tasting like rust and ice on his tongue. A witch, centuries ago. My ancestor killed her, and with her dying breath she cursed my bloodline. We would keep our strength, our longevity, our crown. But we would lose our warmth, all of it. He looked away from her, back out at the storm. I have never felt the sun on my skin. I have never enjoyed the heat of a fire. I do not know the difference between the summer wind and this winter gale. Joy, anger, grief, they are concepts I have only read about in books. And love, he gave a short, harsh laugh that was utterly devoid of humour. The mate bond. My wolf knew you, but I cannot feel it. I feel nothing, only a deep, permanent cold that settles in my bones and never, ever leaves. He had confessed his life's great tragedy, the secret that defined his entire existence. He expected her to recoil, to look at him with horror or, worse, with pity. He braced himself for the platitudes, the empty promises to find a cure that his advisors had sometimes offered centuries ago before they learned it was hopeless. Elara did none of those things. She was silent for a moment, processing the sheer, crushing weight of his confession. An eternity of numbness, a life without feeling. The loneliness of it was a physical thing, a chasm so vast she could not imagine its depths. She did not offer a solution. She did not express pity. She simply acknowledged his pain with a profound and simple empathy that cut through his defences more effectively than any sword. "It must be so lonely," she whispered, her voice nearly stolen by the wind. Lonely, the word landed in the centre of his being, a perfect, devastating summation of his entire life. He had been a king, a warrior, a ruler. He had been surrounded by thousands, but he had always been alone. She was the first person to ever see it. Impulsively, she reached out and laid her gloved hand on his forearm. Through the thick leather of his tunic, he felt it. A tiny, shocking pinprick of heat. It was not a fire, not even an ember. It was the faintest spark, a single molecule of warmth in an ocean of ice. But it was there, it was real, and it was the most intense sensation Cale had felt in 3 centuries. His breath hitched. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. The void inside him, the great, silent emptiness, suddenly ached with a longing so fierce it almost brought him to his knees. A longing for more of that impossible warmth. If you are enjoying this story, please like this video to let me know you'd like to see more content like this. That single moment of contact, that fleeting spark of warmth, changed everything. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar concept, began to take root in the frozen soil of Cale's soul. He found himself seeking Elara out, not with the detached curiosity of a king observing a strange new pet, but with a desperate, burgeoning need. He would find her in the library, and he would sit in silence as she read aloud to him. Her voice was a melody in his world of monotones, a gentle warmth he could almost feel. He began to see the subtle shifts in her expression, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the small smile that touched her lips at a clever turn of phrase. He was learning her, mapping her, like a traveller discovering a new and vibrant continent. One afternoon, she was reading a tale of ancient heroes and sun-drenched lands. As she spoke of a summer festival, of warmth and laughter, he reached out. His movements slow, deliberate. He brushed his fingers against her cheek. Elara stopped reading, her breath catching. His touch was still cold, like chilled marble, but it was no longer the deathly, absolute cold from the battlement. There was something else there, a faint undercurrent, a promise of something more. And for him, the sensation was overwhelming. Her skin was a furnace, a sun. The warmth bloomed under his touch, a dizzying, intoxicating feeling that made the world tilt on its axis. He pulled his hand back as if burned. His heart, a long dormant organ that served only to pump his blood, gave a hard, painful thud in his chest. Hope, it was a terrifying, brilliant, agonizing thing. For the first time, he dared to imagine a future where the ice receded, where he could feel the bond that tied him to this incredible woman. But the curse was ancient and sentient. It had held his line in its frozen grip for generations, and it would not relinquish its power so easily. Hope was its enemy. Warmth was its poison. It began that night, a sharpening of the cold in his veins. He awoke from a shallow, dreamless state of rest with a gasp, his limbs aching with a chill so profound it felt as if his bones were turning to ice. He looked at his hands and saw a fine, crystalline layer of frost creeping from his nail beds, tracing the lines of his skin. He tried to hide it from Elara, but she saw it. She saw the new lines of pain etched around his mouth, the way he sometimes flinched as if struck by an invisible whip. The frost on his skin became more pronounced, a beautiful, deadly filigree that would not melt, even by the fire. The hope he had allowed himself to feel was acting as a catalyst, feeding the curse, making it stronger, more violent. It was as if the magic, having grown complacent in its absolute dominion, was now fighting back with a vengeance, determined to extinguish the tiny flame she had ignited within him. Lord Valerius watched the king's deterioration with a grim, knowing expression. He saw the way Kael's eyes followed the Omega girl, the way he sought her out. He saw the escalating price the king was paying for this foolish distraction. "Your Majesty," Valerius said, approaching Kael in the throne room one evening. The king was slumped on his throne of ice-veined stone, his face pale and drawn. The air around him was visibly shimmering with cold. This cannot continue. The girl is a destabilizing influence. Since her arrival, your condition has worsened. She must be sent away. No, Kael managed, his voice a hoarse rasp. The thought of Elara leaving, of that tiny spark of warmth being removed from his world, was a terror far greater than the physical pain of the curse. "You are letting a fantasy destroy you," Valerius pressed, his voice sharp. "This kingdom needs a strong, dispassionate ruler, the one you have always been. This weakness, this feeling, it will be your undoing. Leave me," Kael commanded, a wave of icy power emanating from him that forced Valerius to take a step back, his breath misting in the air. That night, the curse reached its apex. Elara was woken by a terrible shattering sound, like a mountain of glass breaking. She ran from her room, following the sound and the wave of intense cold to the king's chambers. The guards at his door were frozen in place, encased in sheaths of ice, their faces masks of terror. Elara pushed open the heavy doors. The room was a winter cavern. Thick, jagged crystals of ice covered every surface, growing from the floor and sealing like teeth. And in the centre of the room, on his bed, was Kyle. He was being consumed. Ice was crawling up his body, thick and opaque, locking his limbs in place. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, the grey irises slowly being overtaken by a milky white frost. He was dying. The curse was encasing him, turning him into a permanent monument of ice and sorrow. Kael! She screamed, running to his side. She tried to touch his face, but the cold was so intense it burned her skin. Elara, he breathed, his voice a faint whisper of cracking ice. Get away, I will not leave you. She cried, tears streaming down her face, freezing on her cheeks. It is too late, he rasped. The hope, it fed the cold. His eyes began to glaze over, the last flicker of consciousness fading. Just then, the doors burst open again. Lord Valerius strode in, flanked by two of his own personal guards. His face was a mask of grim resolution. It is as I feared, Valerius said, his voice ringing with cold authority. He is lost. The bond with an unsuitable mate has accelerated the curse's final stage. He has become a liability. What are you talking about? Elara spun to face him, her heart pounding with fear and rage. We have to help him. There is no helping him, Valerius declared. There is only containing him. My family has served the crown for generations. We were there when the curse was laid. We understood its purpose, to create a king free from the weakness of emotion, a king who could not be compromised by love or swayed by grief. You, with your misplaced sentiment, have threatened to undo centuries of stability. He gestured to his guards. Seize the girl. She will be locked away. We will tell the kingdom that the king has entered a state of hibernation to renew his power. The council, led by me, will rule in his stead. The guards advanced on her. Elara looked from their cold, determined faces to Kael's dying form. Everything in her screamed in protest. The man who had saved her, the man who was her other half, was being left to die, and his own advisor was calling it stability. Rage, pure and hot, surged through her. A fierce, protective instinct she had never known she possessed erupted like a volcano. As the guards reached for her, a wave of energy, of pure, brilliant light, burst from her body. It was not magic as the witch's curse was magic. It was life. It was warmth. It was the sun. The guards were thrown back, not by a physical force, but by the sheer intensity of the radiant heat. They stumbled away, shielding their eyes from the golden light that now filled the room. Valerius stared, his face a picture of disbelief and horror. What are you?" he stammered. Elara did not answer him. She did not even see him. Her entire world had narrowed to the man encased in ice. She knew, with a certainty that came from the depths of her soul, what she had to do. Her heritage, a secret even to her, was a lineage of Omegas descended from a sun spirit, their warmth a balm to the world's cold places. Her power was not in fighting, but in healing, in loving. She ignored Valerius's sputtering commands, ignored the guards scrambling to their feet. She walked back to the bed, the golden light around her growing brighter, hotter. She placed her hands on the ice, covering Kael's chest. It hissed and steamed at her touch. She leaned down, pressing her body against his frozen form, and embraced him. She poured all of her love, all of her hope, all of her innate, sun-blessed warmth into him. "I am not leaving you," she whispered against the ice. "You will not be alone anymore." The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The golden light surged from her into the ice, which began to crack with a sound like thunder. Fissures spread across Kael's body, light pouring out from within. The entire room shook as the ancient cold magic fought a battle it could not win against the pure, life-giving energy of a fated mate's love. With a final, deafening explosion, the ice shattered. It did not melt, it sublimated, turning into a glittering cloud of diamond dust that filled the air before vanishing. The unnatural cold in the room was obliterated, replaced by a gentle, life-affirming warmth. Kael lay on the bed. Free, he took a deep, shuddering breath, and for the first time in 300 years, the air that filled his lungs was warm. Colour flooded his skin, turning it from pale marble to the healthy flush of a living man. He blinked, and his eyes, once the colour of a winter storm, were now a clear, brilliant grey, like the sky after the rain. He sat up, looking at his hands, turning them over and over. He could feel the blood humming in his veins. He could feel the soft texture of the sheets beneath his fingers. He could feel the warmth of Elara's body next to his. He could feel everything. His gaze lifted to meet hers. And in that moment, the mate bond, suppressed for so long, slammed into him with the force of a tidal wave. It was a symphony of emotion, love, devotion, gratitude, awe, so powerful it stole his breath. He saw her, truly saw her, not as a puzzle, but as the centre of his universe. Elara, he breathed, his voice thick with emotions he had never known. Lord Valerius, his face ashen with the death of his ambitions, made a move to flee. Kael's head snapped toward him. He lifted a hand, and the shattered shards of ice on the floor reformed into bonds, wrapping around Valerius and his guards, trapping them completely. His power was not gone. It was transformed, no longer a curse of cold, but a tool he could now command, tempered by the warmth she had given him. "You will be taken to the dungeons," Kael said, his voice ringing with a new, vibrant authority. "You will await my judgment." He turned his full attention back to Elara, his eyes softening. "As for you," he reached out, his hand now warm, and cupped her cheek. He could feel the silk of her skin, the heat of her blush. "You saved me. You gave me back my soul. You saved me first," she whispered, her own tears now flowing freely, but they were tears of joy. He pulled her close, and their lips met for the first time. It was not a kiss of cold marble, but of living warmth, of deep, resonant love, a promise of a future filled with all the feeling they had both been denied. The castle was transformed. Within weeks of the curse being broken, the silver spire began to live up to its name in a new way. The magical ice that had coated its walls receded, revealing the beautiful, glittering stone beneath. Sunlight, for the first time in centuries, seemed to linger in the courtyards, and under Elara's gentle guidance, gardens were planted. Small, green shoots, stubborn and hopeful, began to push their way through the thawing earth. The staff, who had lived their lives in a state of muted fear, began to change as well. Smiles were seen in the corridors. Laughter, a sound that had been alien to the spire, began to echo in the great hall. The king was a different man. He was still powerful, still decisive, but his authority was now tempered with a warmth and empathy that inspired fierce loyalty rather than fear. He and Elara were inseparable, a perfect balance of ice and sun, shadow and light. They ruled together, his ancient wisdom complemented by her compassionate strength. 3 months after the curse was broken, on a bright, warm afternoon, a royal messenger arrived with a letter from Elara's old village. She took it to the solar, where Kael was reading, and opened it with steady hands. The script was messy, tear-stained. It was from Lyra. Her sister wrote of how Gavril, enraged by Alara's disappearance and the king's subsequent interference, had been exiled. His pack had shattered. The village had fallen on hard times without their protection. Lyra herself, stripped of her prize and her status, was shunned. She was begging her forgotten, invisible little sister, now the most powerful woman in the kingdom, for forgiveness, for a pittance, for a place to live. Alara read the letter through once. She saw the pathetic, desperate creature her sister had become, and she felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, not a desire for revenge. That part of her life was a story from a book she had finished long ago. It had no more power over her. She walked over to the fireplace, where a cheerful fire now burned brightly, its warmth filling the room. Kael looked up, his grey eyes full of love and understanding. He did not need to ask what the letter contained. He simply held out his hand to her. Alara placed her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. She tossed the letter into the flames. They watched together as the parchment blackened, curled, and turned to ash, her past dissolving into smoke and memory. Her new life, her real life, was here, in the warmth of his hand, in the light of his love. She was home. Where are you listening from? I love hearing your thoughts and connecting with you all in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe for more tales of love and magic.